Hello, alright, you're listening to the Gritty Bowman, home of gritty bow hunting films, interviews, tall tales, and a wee bit of manly boasting.
I'm South Cox, and you're listening to the Gritty Bowman.
There's kind of a hippie vibe here in Missoula.
Yeah, most definitely.
Kinda strong.
And Missoulians will
Hipster.
tell you that Bozeman has a yuppie thing, a Bose Angeles kind of thing going on.
Bose Angeles, right?
Yeah. If you were a barber or a hygienist type, if you were in personal hygiene,
You'd just be unemployed here.
you would be in the unemployment line in Missoula, Montana. If personal hygiene was part of your livelihood.
Oh, bloody hell.
Really? I mean, I don't want to put Jeff on the spot, but
He's just...
someone tell me where the Humane Society of the United States has ever bought 1 acre of habitat, where they have ever funded one project that got rid of invasive weed species, where they've ever funded one project that got rid of the Asian carp in the Illinois River. I mean,
None of it.
Pick whatever it is. They've got net assets in the hundreds of millions, and they've never done anything. We care about wildlife. We care about landscapes. We care about all the things that are necessary for conservation. We'll tax ourselves 11%.
On this episode of Gritty Bowman, Mark Brownlee and myself visit with Randy Newberg and Jeff Sposito. Randy Newberg is the host and producer of the TV show Fresh Tracks with Randy Newberg, a show about self-guided hunting on public lands. Randy is also the host of Hunt Talk Radio, also known as Randy Newberg Unfiltered. As an avid conservationist, Randy Newberg advocates on behalf of hunters, educating his audience in the role hunters have played in restoring wildlife to America in what he calls the greatest story never told. Randy shares his passion for our public lands, a place for all hunters, whether they are or are not a man of means. Jeff Sposito is with Sitka Gear, and he is also an avid conservationist, and with a little help from Randy, has launched a new conservation program titled 2% for Conservation. It was my pleasure to have them on the podcast. And if you're not already, I hope each of you who are listening will take the time to follow Randy. He's kind of an old dude. Sorry, Randy. But Newberg has been around the block a while, and he knows a little bit of history that most young hunters don't have a clue about. And I'm grateful he's on our side, that we've got someone like Randy advocating on behalf of public lands and the animals that live on them. Do what you can to support Jeff's project 2% for Conservation. Call him up, get on his website, follow him on Instagram, ask him how you can help. Remember this quote by Shane Mahoney because it's true. Wildlife and wild places no longer exist by accident or without the intervention of those that truly and deeply care.
Got any water? I might vapor lock here. Since there's no Missoula guys here to defend it, I've got like an open field here to lay it to them. Only in Missoula are you at a public forum and you got a bunch of doobies.
I wonder.
Oh, no. Trust me, that's Missoula.
It reminds me a lot of Portland, actually.
This is Portland wannabe here.
Right. There is absolutely a hippie scene here.
I'm surprised you don't have a dreadlock wig on, right?
I mean, when I leave here, I get deloused. My wife won't let me in the house without getting deloused because there's more chiggers and cricket hoppers and other stuff here. I mean, you know how what's the one song about checking for ticks? When you leave Missoula, you got to check for more than ticks before you go home.
Well, I hope we didn't offend anybody in Missoula.
You don't have a large Missoula audience, do you?
That's right. We're only here.
Not anymore.
That's right.
I'm sure Missoulians have great things to say about Bosemanites, Randy.
They probably do, but that's all right.
Yeah, I got the rundown on how I should move to Bozeman instead of Missoula a little bit earlier.
Well, look how much you'd save in flea and tick collars.
Wow.
You wouldn't have to worry about your kids getting a contact high just by walking through the city park.
Okay. Well, you guys ready?
I'm ready.
Let's go.
I was born ready.
All right, folks. Welcome to the Gritty Bowman Podcast. We're here in Missoula, Montana, and basically we're at the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers annual rendezvous, and I've got with me Randy Newberg.
Brian, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Mark,
and
thank you.
I got my co-host here, Mark Brownlee, and then Jeff Sposito.
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 There you go.
It's like Esposito, the hockey player, without the E on it. Are you
Esposito.
Tony or?
No, but I might have had a grandpa named Tony or
Okay.
Joey or something.
Okay.
All right. Well, we're going to get into some stuff. We got Randy all primed up. Have you had any drinks, Randy?
I haven't. I'm not allowed to drink, but I just spent 2 hours doing an interview for a documentary.
Oh.
Yeah, so I'm full of piss and vinegar right now. Let me tell you, I'm about ready to break out a 55-gallon drum of ass whoop and pour it all over some politicians there.
I just heard your last podcast with one of the gubernatorial candidates.
Yeah, I'm interviewing both governor candidates here in Montana because I'm always preaching that if you have media platforms and you're in the hunting world, you better start engaging in politics. So I'm trying to practice what I preach there.
Well, hopefully we got a rock band in the background. Hopefully the audio turns out pretty good so we can make sure the audience gets to hear all this stuff that Randy's about to drop on us. And so, dude, I've been following your podcast for a long time and your show. I've been a fan for a long time. I love what you do around conservation. Your show is Fresh Tracks.
Fresh Tracks with Randy
With
Newberg.
Randy Newberg. Your podcast is Hunt Talk Radio or
Randy Newberg Unfiltered if I'm mad that day.
And so I have had Ty Stubblefield on. He's a good friend on the
Great
podcast
guy.
a couple of times with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And we've got into the topic of public lands, and we've done a few podcasts on it.
Yep.
Now, in summary, basically what Ty and I have gone over is try to present some facts on how lands are typically managed if they end up in states' control, if they get managed by the states. And we've kind of, we've talked about that a lot, and it seems like most of the listeners get it, that when the lands get moved to the states, the track record is that the states sell the land.
Yep.
Now, there's and so that's really disturbing. If you're into public land and it matters to you, then you should be really concerned about taking it out of federal control, and putting it in the hands of the state.
For sure.
So
70% of hunters west of the Mississippi primarily hunt on public land.
And we've talked about this as well. I mean, public land is really important because hunting's gone. I mean, if hunter access is gone, hunting goes the way of the dodo.
Yeah, I mean, the National Shooting Sports Foundation did these really cool studies in 2008 and 2009, and it asked, what are the reasons people hunt less, quit hunting altogether, or they come from a hunting family but didn't get into hunting? Across the board, every way they've asked the question, the answer cited most often is lack of accessible places to hunt. So I'm not the smartest guy around, but if 70% of hunters in the West hunt public land, and the number one reason that people get out of hunting or don't hunt so much is lack of places to hunt, maybe someone can connect the dots to me to give me the logic of how getting rid of the public lands is somehow good for the future of hunting. I mean, I got dropped on my head a lot as a child, I'm sure, but even I think I can sort that one out as being BS.
Well, and I look at it even one step further. Like, I think that, so let's say hunting disappears, right? Some people will be like, so what? If hunting disappears, what's the risk there? I mean, you still have all these animals, right?
That's the argument some make.
Okay. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. How much time we got? I mean, let's face it. We go back to the history of the public, whether you want to call it the conservation ethic in this country or the public land movement in this country.
Yep.
You roll back the hands of time to when that started. It started with hunters. It started with Theodore Roosevelt, George Bird Grinnell. I mean, the list is long. And they fought the same political battles we see today. There were people who did not like public lands. There were people who did not want anything to do with the notion that the public should have a place for the public.
Yeah.
And so those guys were hunters. They were connected to the land in a way only hunters get connected to the land. We go there. It's where we get our food. It's part of our culture. all of a sudden conservation of the place where you're getting your food and it is so much tied to your identity becomes really valuable to you, so that when some politician decides he's going to try to get rid of it or sell it or give it to his buddies as currency to repay his political favors, when you're a hunter, you get kind of worked up over that stuff.
Well, let me ask you, like, what do you think will happen if hunting were gone? What would happen to conservation?
Oh, I have no doubt that conservation as we know it would be gone without hunting.
And why is that?
Well, you'd lose its funding mechanism. I mean, all our state game agencies are primarily funded by licensed dollars.
Couldn't they just tax the people?
Well, they could, but let's look at the CARA bill in 2000. 99 and 2000, there was the acronym is CARA, C-A-R-A, Conservation and Reinvestment Act.
Okay.
That was going to charge a much smaller excise tax on non-hunting equipment, like backpacks and binoculars, tents and whatever.
Something else.
Yep. The whole idea was it's going to help fund this conservation picture.
Yep.
Those groups, their industry, went to Congress and screamed and yelled and got it killed. They had their chance to step up to the plate. We as hunters, think about when we imposed an 11% tax on firearms and ammunition. It was 1937, one of the darkest financial periods in the history of our country.
Yeah.
And what did hunters do? They stood up and said, you know what? We care about wildlife. We care about landscapes. We care about all the things that are necessary for conservation. We'll tax ourselves 11%. I mean, do you think any group at that point in time, in the Depression of the 30s, what other group would have stood up and said, tax us because we think it's important?
Right.
In fact, even in the prosperous times of today, do you think that people would stand up and agree to an 11% tax on sleeping bags and tents and boots and other stuff?
Well, they haven't.
Right, they haven't.
Multiple times,
right.
I believe.
So where else, what would happen to conservation? Conservation would disappear because it would have no funding.
Yep.
It's advocacy that the hunters provide through our political actions, our memberships in all of the great conservation groups. I mean, there's so many things that hunters provide to conservation that would disappear.
Yeah. It's sort of like when you look at the African situation where, a hunter pays some $1 million to hunt an elephant and kill it.
Whatever it is, yeah.
Right? And then there's a lot of anti-hunter or non-hunter that their heart goes out to this elephant and they're like, okay, it's just, we shouldn't be doing that. So they want to take away or make it illegal to hunt the elephant. And then where did the dollars come? Where did that $1 million come from now at this point?
It doesn't. I mean, Africa is as different as it is from the United States as far as how our system operates. There are a lot of similarities in that hunting funds conservation, it funds anti-poaching, it funds...
That's just it. And so when you take that away and you make it illegal, where does that $1 million come from? Has anyone stepped up to the plate and put that dollars in place of hunting?
No. And that's...
And some people are like, well, why doesn't that guy who buys the elephant for $1 million, how come he doesn't just give $1 million to help elephants?
Right.
He doesn't.
No, he doesn't.
He buys a hunt.
Right.
He's willing to do that, but not necessarily just give the money.
Right. And I don't know the answer to that.
But that is that's the track record of humanity.
It is. And humanity has this track record of criticizing something without providing an alternative solution. And if hunters have been remarkable in one thing, it's that when we saw a problem, we didn't just complain about the problem. We stepped up and we provided solutions, we provided funding, we provided advocacy, we provided everything else. And I get the idea of being concerned about the animals. I mean, all of us who hunt are concerned about the animals. But we're concerned more about the whole herd or the whole population of the animal than the one animal we're going to eat. I mean, it's not our fault that this relationship we have with the animal, it's unfortunate that the elk is on that end and I'm on this end.
Yeah.
But there's nothing, that's not something I had any say in. I'm going to eat. And eating is the oldest pursuit of the human endeavor.
Yeah.
So I understand people wanting to say, oh, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do this. Okay, give me the alternative then. And no one has the alternative.
I think there's an important point there about the funding that we should recognize is that when we make comparisons to Africa and North America, the United States and Canada, is that we have created that successful funding model, and it goes kind of under the radar, where the average citizen, even the average sportsman, hunter and angler, don't necessarily recognize it or appreciate it because it works so smoothly and under the radar between the excise taxes and the licenses and fees. But that's something we need to be proud of, and we need to recognize that's there and it works. And we should, and that's what other countries like Africa have struggled to find is a model that they can implement that successfully does what ours has done.
Right. I would agree, Jeff, that there are those differences for sure. And it's hard for us in America to not take for granted the wildlife abundance we have today, because we were born into the good old days.
Right.
But you roll back the hands of time, it wasn't always this way. When was it? I think when the Boone and Crockett Club was formed in the late 1800s, the best estimate was there were 5,000 elk in Montana. By the time Theodore Roosevelt left office in 1908, there was not that many more.
Yeah.
He'd at least stopped the decline. And then by the time Franklin Roosevelt, his cousin, left office or died in office in sometime in the 1940s, early 40s, there were 15,000 elk in Montana. And today there's 150,000 elk in Montana. And that didn't happen by accident.
Right. Yeah. How'd that happen?
Right. And so I think, Mark, part of the problem is, if you want to call it a problem, is you really don't miss something until you're in danger of losing it. And we've grown up in this period of abundance.
Yeah.
And so as hunters and anglers and public land recreationists, we've had so much abundance of opportunity, we maybe are a little complacent about protecting what we have.
So if you take the hunting out of the equation, then to me it's like I am concerned about. My biggest thing is I really feel strongly that without hunting, there is also no conservation, and then this habitat or the animals, they just disappear.
Right.
And I've heard it said by Stephen Ranilla, I think, who was it? Jim Shockey, who was on Joe Rogan podcast. And he went in and he talked quite a bit about the more expensive an animal is to hunt,
right,
the safer its future.
Yeah, sure. It's true.
And that's kind of hard for some people to look at. But the truth is, money makes the world go round. Mm-hmm. And when you take an animal like that, like the elephant in Africa, and if it's worth $1 million, wow, that's an expensive resource. We're not going to let it get poached.
Right.
We're going to make sure it survives. We're going to make sure it breeds well. We're going to make sure it has the habitat it needs, which in turn spills over to all the other animals that benefit from that habitat improvement. And you have this cascade of effects. But really, the poor, like, you take some obscure frog that nobody cares about and it's endangered.
It has no
good
advocates.
Luck. It has no advocates because it's not worth any money.
Right.
Well, I think that's a perfect gateway into what I think Randy is pretty passionate about too. Is we hear this comparison between preservation and conservation a lot lately, and there's a big movement of a certain demographic that really believes in this preservationist philosophy. And the difference between preservation and conservation is so relevant and important to understand how humans are impacting the world and what that means to do we need to conserve or do we need to preserve? And that's.
So what does that mean?
Well, I mean, you think about whether you adhere to the preservation ideology or the conservation ideology, the similarities is we're concerned about the landscape and the animals and ourselves.
Yep, that's a similarity between the two ideologies.
Right. The difference often comes in the fact that some believe man is not part of that solution or part of that equation, a kind of a hands-off. And the conservation model is more of a, hey, man is here, man's been here since the beginning of time. We've got 7.5 billion people on the face of this earth. how are we going to just disregard man's impact on this? And I'm a firm believer that conservation has even more relevance going forward than it has in the past.
Yeah.
Because to Jeff's point, if we say we're just going to preserve this, and there's a place for preservation.
Yeah.
But to think that just try, it's hard to do because we're in such an urban world, but try to think about how the elk of North America are now living really in what's fringe habitat. Their original habitat was the prairies and foothills.
Totally.
We've built cities, we've built dams and highways and railroads and everything else in their primary habitat.
Yep.
They're now, even in their relative abundance today compared to what they were 100 years ago, they're still living on the marginal fringe of what was their historical habitat.
Yep. They're forced into more rugged areas where humans don't populate it.
Right. And so for someone to think that what we see today is some natural cycle that's going to balance itself, that, just hands off and everything will come into balance, it might come into some balance somewhere, but it's not the balance everybody's thinking that,
right,
this will be in balance with that. No, we're going to see huge disruptions because just using, again, the simplified model of elk. Elk used to be able to travel vast expanses in their migrations.
Yep.
And that played into their survival instincts, how they evolved. And the predators, same thing, would follow them, whatever it was. Now, every one of them are on these very fringe elements of their traditional habitats. And this is not what we live in today because of human presence.
Yep.
Is not this normal, natural model everyone likes to think it is.
Right.
The reality is, and I feel like it's hard for anybody to argue, is that the civilization of humanity impacts all wildlife, right? So conservation is about how do we understand what that impact is and how do we still create, natural habitats and create healthy ecosystems for wildlife to be in.
It's like the wolf situation. So I get it that wolves were extirpated from the western United States.
Yep.
Right? They're considered, for lack of a better term, extinct in Wyoming, for example, in Montana. They're gone. But they're not extinct across the planet. There's a whole giant population of them in Canada and up north, right? So we call them endangered, which technically, to me, they're not.
Right.
And then we bring them back into the lower 48 and introduce them down here, and the whole wolf thing goes. But I've kind of, I hear this from a lot of wolf advocates that, you don't need to hunt them. Just let it be. It'll balance out. It's nature. Why does anyone need to interfere with nature? Okay. Well, it's sort of like what you just touched on. Nature isn't what it was.
No.
Picture elk trapped in a small cage or small acreage, and then you put wolves in there.
Right.
It's a recipe for disaster. It's not like they have no boundaries like they did before. It's not like the elk can go to they're like in a trapped location. And so this idea that nature just will take care of itself, dude, the amount of people here, the way it was compared to where it was back in the day, we have so many more human beings on the planet that you can't just say nature will take care of itself anymore because we're a one-species planet.
Right, and that's where I would say the track record of hunting and conservation have that sense of responsibility that, look, I am here having an impact on the landscape. That provides a responsibility, a duty to do what I can through my advocacy, my funding, my licenses, my excise taxes, to try and offset that impact I and my collective community of people are having on that landscape. Now, if someone wants to say, well, I live in, I don't care what city you want to call it, I live there and it's nice to know that this place is preserved.
Yep.
Okay, that's all fine and dandy. You're preserving these really little small pieces that are not part of the bigger picture. And it is not this, well, I don't want to say fantasy, but it's not this idealistic idea they have. That's not the reality. The reality is we have displaced every other animal, every other mammal, fish, or whatever, we have displaced them on this planet to our benefit.
Absolutely.
And if we want to deny that we have no responsibility to try accommodate our impacts on this landscape, then in my mind, all of the wild creatures are in serious trouble if we're going to walk away from our responsibility to practice conservation.
Yeah, I think of it the same way. It's like 90% of the animals in this state, let's say, are human beings, and 10% make up the animals. You got this 90-10 thing going on, and we want to pretend like if we just ignore that 10, they'll be safe.
Yeah.
But we've depleted them to such an unnatural scale, and they're in such like fake, barely capable habitat to keep them, fragile habitats to keep them in place, that the idea that nature can just balance itself out and come through after we've taken up 90% of everything seems like wishful thinking.
Yeah, well, not only are we depleting and displacing them as humans, but we're industrialized as a nation. So look at all the unnatural things we depend on as humans, and we have to recognize that there's an impact of that on wildlife too.
You can point to so many pieces of that put us in this unnatural balance. Let's just talk of fire, okay?
Yep.
I'm a big advocate that fire improves habitat.
Yeah.
But we have large civilizations, large cities that have built right up to the fire zone, i.e. the urban fire interface.
Right.
So, and my hometown of Bozeman, Montana is a great example. As quick as the Forest Service decides we're going to do a controlled burn, you get those people living right next to it screaming and yelling, I didn't move here so that I would have to inhale smoke for 2 days.
Right.
Okay? So we can't do that. That gets litigated. All right? We can't do anything else. So we suppress fire. A natural fire starts. What do? Bring in the tankers, bring in the fire crews, risk life and limb. Stop it. And then once you've stopped a natural cycle such as fire to the degree we have, because of our own personal biases and our own fears, our own property interests, you have completely disrupted a natural system that depended and evolved on fire. So to think that somehow that system is going to balance itself by continuing to suppress fire and telling man, we don't want you part of that equation unless there's a fire.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Stay out of there unless there's a fire, then go put the fire out.
Yeah.
It's that kind of stuff that just causes you to scratch your head and
say. It's funny. I heard someone say it seems like the only predator we want to manage anymore is man.
Right. But to your point, you brought this up earlier about the person who says, you don't need to manage wolves.
Yep.
Okay. Let's talk about the history of the wolf reintroduction in the Northern Rockies. I was there at the beginning. I grew up with wolves in northern Minnesota all my life as a youngster. I never really gave that wolves were this big, bad, little red.
They were always there for you.
It's like, okay, they are what they are. So we go through this process. All the stakeholders come to the table. And the Secretary of Interior, Bruce Babbitt, has been given instructions by President Clinton that you got to get the sign-on from the states.
Yep.
Well, to get Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming to sign on, some concessions had to be made. Let's strike a deal. So the deal was if you reach this number, you're going to get state control. As long as you stay above another number, you're going to keep state control. All this stuff was promised.
Yep.
So most of us looked at it and said, well, if that's the deal, not, we can live with that.
Yep.
Well, the ink was not even dry before they started pulling the stakes out and moving the markers. So how do you go to, and this is why I say that wolves were not a wildlife experiment. They were a social experiment.
Yeah.
An experiment implies that there's some unknown, that we're testing a hypothesis.
Yes.
Every biologist said, here is what the wolves will grow to on this productive landscape around Yellowstone Park. And those biologists were dead nuts accurate. You look at how it grew, they were so close.
They had it pinned down.
Yeah, it was not a wildlife experiment.
We knew.
Right. What it became was a social experiment because outside interests came in and said, we're going to litigate this. And we're going to litigate, and we're going to litigate, and we're going to litigate. And we're going to tie it up in courts. Well, it's not like the wolves stop breeding while the judge is trying to figure out what the right ruling is.
Right.
They promised us if we came up with this plan and that plan, and I was very involved in all of this. And if you're someone there who trusted this process we have in place with the ESA and other stuff, you trusted it like I did, like a lot of other people did, and you said, you know what? There is a place on the landscape for every animal. Let's try and make this work. And all of a sudden you have some group that says, you know what? We don't really care about that process. We care about raising money. We care about control. And we're going to upset the apple cart. We're going to litigate this to the end of time. And here's the tragedy. They have taken people like Randy Newberg, who I think was an open-minded kind of conservation person.
Conservation-minded, ethical human being who wanted to see an extirpated species
return to the landscape
because it's a moral, correct thing to do.
And it's been the history of hunters. We've always expanded species, whether they're species we hunt or don't hunt. Yep. That's been part of our conservation ethos. So now, having been abused in that process, being an involuntary lab rat to their social experiment, as I sit here today talking to you guys, you would not be able to convince me to participate in another reintroduction of a species under the current system. There's no amount of love or money that would get me to do that. And to me, with all the conservation work that lies ahead of us, all the important species stuff that needs to be done, for that process to take middle-of-the-road people who are advocates for all animals and push them over to a point where they feel that abused, that neglected by the process, such that we're going to forego so many other conservation opportunities, that's a screwed-up system. So those who say...
That's really upsetting.
Yeah. And those who say, well, you shouldn't be able to hunt wolves or you don't have to hunt them, well, that was one of the deals that we made. Was part of the deal. Right. You said once we reach
X number,
100 wolves, 10 breeding pairs in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, and as long as you keep above 220 breeding pairs, your state management plan will be in effect. And they went through this whole thing, all right.
And keep in mind, these are not extinct animals.
No, they're by the
They have healthy populations
elsewhere.
up north.
Right. And so when groups feel that they can kind of just throw the whole works away, that all of the compromise, all the work that went into it, it's frustrating.
How did they get away with it? How are they doing it? People don't understand. What do you mean?
What mechanism?
Yeah.
Oh, they use the courts and the judges. Okay. So, and this is where I say what we practice in the world of conservation, those are wildlife experiments because we're using science and biology and all these models and everything. And what they use, their mechanisms for change are politics and litigation.
Yeah.
And that results in different outcomes. And by default, in my mind and by the minds of many scholars, if your mechanism for change is litigation and other social tools of politics, that's a social experiment. So how are they doing it? There's a really good piece of legislation that I think was passed in the late 60s, early 70s called the Equal Access to Justice Act. And I call it
Equal Access to Justice Act.
Right, EAJA. And I kind of call it the little old lady law.
Okay.
And it was designed so that if someone had to, and I'll just use an example. Say Grandma had the farm and the federal government says, we're going to put an interstate through Grandma's farm. We're only going to pay her $20.
Yeah.
Well, Grandma doesn't have the money to go and sue the feds. So this bill said if the federal government is damaging you, you can go hire an attorney, and if you prevail, your attorney fees are going to get paid.
Okay.
Good idea. I agree with that.
Seems like that's fair. Otherwise, you could get abused.
Right. And so as part of that law, they put a provision in there that said if your net worth is over X amount, you aren't going to get reimbursed. So Donald Trump, Bill Gates, they're not going to get reimbursed under this law.
All right.
And then they imposed the same a similar idea, a different dollar threshold that said if you're a business, a corporation, partnership, whatever, you also have a net worth threshold.
Okay.
That if you're over that number, you're not getting reimbursed if you prevail.
Okay.
The idea being, if you got the resources, you can protect yourself in this country, but Grandma can't. Well, there's an exception to that for nonprofit organizations. 501c3 organizations are not subject to any net worth threshold. So you look at how many lawsuits are filed by the HSUS, Humane Society of the United States. I went out and looked at their most recent tax return. Their net assets are in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Whoa. How come they're not subject to that?
Because they convinced a senator from Vermont to put an exclusion, an exemption in the Equal Access to Justice Act that excludes nonprofit organizations. So they get reimbursed.
Now these organizations that are worth millions,
hundreds of millions,
hundreds of millions,
can now
sue the federal government, and they get reimbursed their attorney fees if they prevail.
That's bollocks.
So
what is it, Mark?
That's bollocks. That is absolute bollocks. That's what we
move
call
that
it.
closer.
Absolute bollocks. Is
yeah,
what that is.
It's crazy. I mean, so the federal agency has to pay all these attorney fees. So let's talk about how the model works in practicality. So,
Okay.
and this is why I say that the wolf was not a canine; it was a bovine. And people are like, "What do you mean the wolf is a bovine?"
Cash cow.
Cash cow.
Cash cow, right?
Yeah. And here's how. So, Center for Biological Diversity, who sent out a big notice when I did a wolf episode.
Yep, I saw that one.
So they started an online petition to have me thrown off the air, and they sent all of my contact information to all of their members, and I received hundreds and hundreds of death wishes. Whatever, is what it is. And so I go and look at their website. They've got like 100 employees or something.
Yep.
They got like 30 or 40 of them that are attorneys. Not biologists, they're attorneys.
Okay.
So, all right. So I own a CPA firm, right?
Yep,
I'm a CPA. So here's how we make our money. We pay an employee $40 an hour, and we charge $100 an hour.
Right.
That's how law firms do it.
Yep.
So Center for Biological Diversity has all these attorneys on staff. Let's say they pay them $50 an hour, $100,000 a year. So those attorneys go and file all these lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit.
Yeah.
If they prevail on any part of it, even though it's supposed to be a substantial part, they're getting reimbursed if they prevail on just about any part. The minimum rate they get reimbursed is $175 an hour right now. So they make $125 per hour for every hour they can prove that attorney worked. Okay? So if that attorney was able to prove that they billed out 2,000 hours, which is a work year.
Yep.
They made $250,000 on that attorney.
Margin.
It's non-profit, though, right?
Exactly.
Non-profit, right?
So, there are law firms that don't have 40 environmental attorneys on staff.
Right.
But it's not just Center for Biological Diversity. It's many of these what I call drive-by litigators. So that is the mechanism they use to take laws that when they were passed, let's face
So they
it,
don't really care necessarily about
No.
they just need to sue so they can make money.
They make
Right.
money. It raises their profile. It's a marketing tool, and it raises donations. Back to your point of why aren't they worried about the endangered rattlesnake? I can't remember what it is in New Mexico.
Yeah.
Why aren't they worried about the whatever little grasshopper? Well, you can't make any money advocating on behalf of rattlesnakes, but
No.
now you get wolves and grizzly bears and whatever else. Boy,
People will pay you money.
Right. And I don't like to be so cynical as to think that's how it is, but I've spent enough time engaged with a lot of them, and I have friends who work for some of these groups that are not the litigators, but they end up kind of being associated with the litigators.
Yep.
And they'll tell you that is part of their business model.
So it's not even, Randy, you don't even think that it's an emotional thing about a certain species or an uneducated thing about conservation and habitat. It's truly an economical.
To the donors, to the good-hearted people who are concerned about wildlife and species, who are sending them money, I think it's all about what you said, Jeff. They think they're doing the right thing.
Right.
To those leading these groups, it's all about control. It's about a business model. It's about a strategy.
And I think that's true because, and it's pretty easy to see, do they put money into actual habitat and help of the animals? As far as I can tell, all their funds go back into more litigation.
Yeah.
They don't go into the animals. You look at where the money comes from that does fund this, and it's us.
Right. So someone tell me where the Humane Society of the United States has ever bought 1 acre of habitat, where they have ever funded one project that got rid of invasive weed species, where
Yeah.
they've ever funded one project that got rid of the Asian carp in the Illinois River. I mean,
None of it.
Pick whatever it is. They've got net assets in the hundreds of millions, and they've never done anything. And here's where I'm going to have to calm down here. I'm about ready to go unfiltered. But Jeff knows what buttons to push. And
I do.
The environmental movement got hijacked by these groups.
Yeah.
Because back when the environmental movement started, if you read the history of it, it got started back in they call it the post-war period, when there was atomic testing going on. That was one of the things that really started this environmental movement. And then it grew in the 50s and 60s, and we ended up with good legislation like Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act. I mean, who doesn't want clean air and clean water?
Right.
Well, then in the 80s and 90s, that movement got hijacked. And unfortunately, today, it's hijacked even worse than it has been through all of these examples we're talking about. So I'm very particular when I read an article in the Aspen Daily News or whatever their newspaper is that says, hunters and conservationists debate the role of mountain lions.
Yep.
Wait a second. Hunters and conservationists debate. That would imply
we're not
fighting.
Separate.
Right. What are we fighting with ourselves? We're going to argue in the mirror?
Yeah.
It should have said hunters and environmentalists. And I'm getting to the point where the term environmentalists and conservationists is being mixed up so much in the media that I'm really making a point to say, you know what? There's a huge difference between these two minds of ideologies, whatever you want to call it.
And I think that's catching on, especially in the hunting community in that area where I think of environmentalists and BHA has been a part of that too, kind of taking back the moniker of conservationists for hunters. Environmentalists are the other ones that are these extreme groups involved in litigation, not really basing their actions on science, but more or less on social issues. And although there are probably a lot of misinformed people who have good intentions helping these organizations, the organizations themselves, I don't think they're naive at all to what they're doing.
Oh, no. And the unfortunate part is there are some really good environmental groups that are doing good work that they aren't building their model on this litigation idea.
Yeah.
But they've been hijacked, and they've not stood up and said, hey, we're different from those guys. No one over there is willing to point out there's some abuse going on.
Yeah.
And what happens when you have, lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, no management actions get taken, whether it's state management plans, whether it's land use management plans, controlled burns, whatever it might be, thinning, you name it. And so that plays into the hand of the people who say, see, the federal government can't manage lands, we should just sell them. So it becomes part of this bigger discussion when people want to just litigate to the ends of time because they have, you look at their incentives, they have no incentive to collaborate.
Yeah.
When they hold all the chips over here at the end, they say, I don't like that, so I'm going to litigate. They've got the financial incentive, they got the publicity incentive, they got the marketing incentive.
How do we compete as hunters?
Well,
come on, Randy. How do we do this?
You got to give us something here.
Mark's getting depressed.
I've been hunting for 2 years now. I'm brand new at hunting.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 2 years.
Okay.
I'm starting my third year this year. What can I do? Little legal immigrant that I am. What can I do?
Well,
right up there.
One of the things that's going on right now is there's a push in the conservation community to go out and start talking about the distinction and the mechanisms that are being used. I've been on the road the last month every Friday night with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. We're doing a series called Real Conservation Matters. We've been to Grand Junction, Denver, Albuquerque. Next week we're in Salt Lake. We got Phoenix, Tucson. And the idea is to talk about this in a factual manner, provide the research, and there's going to be an effort by a lot of the hunting groups to start providing this, what you asked, Mark, what can I do?
Okay.
They're going to be advocates for change. They're going to be leading some of that. They're going to be employing their membership and their political power. But it wouldn't take much to change it. And one of the things that you can often tell if, and an old Vietnam fighter pilot told me this one time when I raised a little hell and got a lot of flack in the public eye.
Yeah.
He said, Randy, you know you're over a valuable target when the flak coming at you is really hot.
Yeah.
So when I try to, and I'm getting to answer your question, one of the things that we can do, let's make it so that nonprofit groups are subject to the same net worth thresholds that individuals and corporations are.
Yeah.
Let's
that would be a major step in the right direction.
Right. So we don't have to get rid of the benefits for grandma.
Yeah.
In the Equal Access to Justice Act. Let's just say, you know what, you nonprofit groups are subject to the same rules as everybody else.
So who's this jerk from Vermont? I
want to
go find him.
Patrick Leahy was it? I think he was from Leahy. I think he was from Vermont. Anyhow, he got a lot of donations from their cause, but
I'm sure
you could change that.
Okay.
You could change that, and so here's another trick they have. So they will bundle 20 different claims in one lawsuit.
Okay.
And then they might be under NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. They might be under the ESA, Endangered Species Act. It might be under any of the big laws.
Right.
On the federal level, there's also this little thing called APA, Administrative Procedures Act.
Okay.
And that says if you're the Forest Service or the BLM or whoever, here are the procedures you have to go through to establish your regulations, like public notice and public hearings and deadlines and stuff.
Yeah, okay.
So they bundle one of those little, as the rest of the world calls them technicalities, into that big lawsuit.
Yep.
And even though the EAJA says you have to prevail in a substantial manner, the courts have been awarding them reimbursements if they prevail on one of these little technicalities. So let's just change that to say, you know what? You can't bundle APA claims or administrative procedure claims, technicality claims, in that. It has to be substantial.
Right.
Here's the other part. Many of these lawsuits don't even get to court. They settle before they get to court, and it gets sealed.
Yep.
Or when it goes to court, the decision and the judgment is sealed. So we end up not knowing how much was paid or to who it was paid or what claims it was paid under. Let's make sure that none of these can be sealed. So the whole world has to know.
Right. So there's complete transparency.
Right. So there's not a lot that really has to change. And back to my Vietnam fighter pilot story.
Yeah.
When I start talking about this stuff, these groups come unwound. I mean, you got to scrape them off the ceiling, which tells me I'm over a valuable target when I start talking about that stuff.
If some of those things were to take place, it would eliminate livelihoods. It would eliminate huge sums of money for some powerful groups. So, of course, they're going to fight it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, have hunters. One thing that I found a little frustrating is I haven't seen a lot of the hunting communities, gathering the forces, getting the troops together to in a unified way to go and have some of these initiatives take place. It's like we've just abdicated from the political sphere completely.
Yeah, and Jeff knows, Jeff and I have talked about this a lot, is we in the hunting world have kind of done our advocacy through 501c3 organizations, and we've done it in a proactive manner, not a litigation manner. So we've got our heads down, we're volunteering, we're doing habitat projects, we're doing this.
We're getting elk put back in Kentucky.
We're doing conservation.
Right. And so
we're not in the courtrooms litigating.
Exactly. So we've staffed our groups with biologists and scientists and other people because we got work to do on the ground.
Right.
And while we're doing that, they're over there laughing at us. They're like, look at those knuckleheads. They're letting us have free reign here. It's almost like, in one of my presentations, I say, we in the conservation world, we were playing football. And somewhere along the way, they got the game changed to soccer. And I don't care if you're the Denver Broncos World Super Bowl champions, you aren't going to beat the Portland Timbers in soccer.
No.
And they're smart. They're not dummies. They figured it out. And right now, we're playing soccer, and we drafted a team with big, fat defensive
bunch
and
of football players.
Yeah. So, but to your point, Brent, I think as much as you may not have seen the hunting world engaging and schooling up on this, 3 years from now, I think you're going to see a big change in that.
And why do you think that?
because of all the meetings I've been to in the last year, all the phone calls I've been
Right here,
to,
man.
all the conference calls I've sat on because of Jeff Sposito and other guys talking about, and not just talking about, but putting together ideas of 2% for conservation. Can we talk about that
Yeah,
today?
well, that's what we're
Yeah,
going to do.
I hope
All
we
right.
can. Yeah.
Okay, so
It's
I
a,
mean,
it's a good segue here.
exactly. I mean, what Jeff is doing.
People are wondering what Jeff's doing here so
Yeah,
far.
all right,
right.
I'll shut
Other
up
than to
then.
push the Randy buttons.
Yeah, I'll shut up. I'm going to let Jeff start talking.
So,
'cause
Jeff-
I'm like ready to get pissed off.
Tell
here.
us about this. Before you do that, tell folks a little bit about you, like who you are.
Sure. I am nobody special. How about that? just an average hunter, man. I grew up.
And you're in good company.
I grew up hunting and fishing, and I've been fortunate that I've worked in the hunting industry for almost 7 years now. I work for Sitka Gear, so
Yep.
I do sales and marketing for them, and
You have
beyond-
one amazing stash.
Thank
dude.
you. I
Like-
do. Yeah. Since this is a radio show, I do have a handlebar mustache that that my wife does not love so much, but but it's trademarked now, so I can never cut it off.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I work in the hunting industry, and part of my job at Sitka has been getting involved with conservation groups and building relationships. Really selfishly for Sitka on our brand and how we market and work with conservation groups, but then also we recognize the need as a company to support these groups, and through that I've really learned about the struggles that conservation has, but also the impact they have and how important they are.
Yep.
And that's kind of what's become my passion outside of my professional life is really learning about how we as sportsmen can really have an impact. Like you just asked, Mark, what can we do to help conservation groups, to help this larger voice? So that's a little bit about what I do.
So keep going.
Yeah, Jeff. Come on, Jeff. If I have to, I'll push his buttons.
Start
now.
pushing them.
There you go.
So, Jeff is modest and understated, as are a lot of hunters. But I think you've identified a great situation, Jeff, with the whole 2% for conservation. And hunters have always spoke up for wildlife and for habitat and for the public lands. And Jeff is 2% is just heading further down that path.
Yeah, so what Randy mentions, we've started, myself and Randy's been a huge help, and a handful of other friends and really friends I've made working in the industry. I've started an organization called 2% for Conservation.
Yep.
And we literally have just launched this organization. The website just went live hours ago. So I'm stoked for this opportunity to talk to you guys about it and get the word out there a little bit. But we've been working on it hard, nights and weekends, long hours of the night for the last 2 years, and really the mission of our organization is to help conservation groups like BHA or Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation or whoever it is, help them get a bigger voice, help them raise money, help them gain volunteers so they can have a better impact on conservation. So what I've learned working at Sitka is conservation groups struggle to raise funds. They are heavily dependent on volunteers. Fundraising is extremely hard. If you've ever been to an RMEF banquet or a local banquet, this organization, what they're doing here, it's a lot of work to raise money, and money is what it's about. They need money to do their conservation work.
Yeah.
And beyond that, they need volunteers. So part of what we've done is try to identify a way to get businesses more involved in supporting conservation groups, to step up to the plate and to write checks to help them be successful. Because as we started this conversation earlier, I think you mentioned, what if hunters were, or you couldn't hunt or fish anymore? What if it was gone?
Yep.
Right? What would the impact be on wildlife? Well, also think about as a business, right? What would the impact be on all of the hunting industry businesses? Well, we don't have consumers anymore.
Well, dude, that's
We
one
wouldn't
thing
have-
I'm like, it feels, and maybe I'm just, I just feel like there's some large hunting companies out there. How come they're not involved politically? They seem to be just like pretending like the habitat's not under attack and that public lands aren't going to disappear.
And it's so important. So, it's a long-term vision. Sometimes that's hard, right? Short-term, you're marketing your brand, you're trying to sell your products. Long-term, you have to realize if we're not doing what we need to do as businesses to protect the hunting and fishing industries, then you won't have customers in 10, 20 years from now. You'll be out of business.
Trust me, like as I'm doing a podcast and I'm thinking, I go out there and I take a stance on like public lands and start talking about some issues. Well, I'm in Oregon. I'm right near Malheur County. I'm right there with the Bundy situation and everything else. And I go out and I say this, well, there's a whole community of people who don't really like me at this point because of what I've said. So I understand where, from a company standpoint.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's hard. But at the same time, this is why we're here.
Yeah, you got to stand up for what you believe in as a company, right or wrong. I mean, you got to take a stance. But I think as an industry, there are some layup things that we can all fight for that we would all agree on, right?
Yeah.
So what we've done with 2% for Conservation, we're a 501c3, a nonprofit, and we the other half of the puzzle that we want to do is give companies recognition for what they do for conservationists, right? So there are a lot of companies, you got First Light Pants on, they do a ton of stuff for conservation, right? We want to help consumers be aware of that. We want them to understand what companies do care, what companies are giving back. So then when you can go make a purchasing decision, shoot, I'd rather buy product from a company who's giving back money and supporting conservation than one who isn't or may not care.
I mean, that's the one reason, like for us, as we're talking about working with partners, it's like which ones are involved in conservation and which ones are not. And the ones that are more involved are the ones we want to be working with.
Yeah, so here's kind of high level.
But it's kind of hard to see sometimes.
That's right. So this is high level our vision for 2% for conservation. I really think we have an opportunity to build this branding mechanism where people can be, where it can make it much easier for consumers to be aware of who gives back, right? So I envision the 2% for conservation logo being on hang tags or packaging of all the products of these companies who are members of 2% Conservation, who we have certified do give back to conservation, right? If you're a consumer, you can go to the store, you can go to Sportsman's Warehouse, and you can look at the shelf of ammunition, and you could see a box of, totally hypothetical, but a box of Hornady with a logo on it, and a box of Federal without a logo on it, or whatever, and know that company gives back, that company doesn't.
That's
brilliant.
Genius.
That's brilliant.
Genius.
That is brilliant.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but I'm
brilliant.
glad to hear that. But so what we're trying to do now is really we have no member companies now, right? We just started.
Okay.
But there are a lot of companies in the hunting and fishing industry that are already giving back 1% of sales. So really, let me take a step back. Where we came to 2% for conservation, it's about 1% of your money, right?
Yep.
Plus 1% of your time equals 2% for conservation. So money is not the only thing that could solve it. Conservation groups need volunteers too. So we're going to go around, we're going to talk to companies, and we're going to look at the ones who are giving back and try to certify ones who are giving back 1% of sales a year, conservation, and guys who are volunteering and getting their hands dirty with their employees, volunteering 1% of their time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of them that already do it that deserve recognition for it. So I'm hoping once we get the word out there, there'll be a lot of companies stepping up that say, I want to help spread this message.
I like it, dude. And I think later it should be 10% conservation.
Well, I think I wouldn't disagree with you, but I think the cool thing is about 1% when you look at industry as a whole. And
that's a lot. If everybody just did one.
It's totally scalable, man. I mean, the way conservation groups are funded now is by individuals, right? Going to the banquet, buying a $30 membership, right? And they've been successfully raised a lot of money. But if you look at what the dollars are from industry companies as a whole, the scale and the dollars grow really fast, and there's a lot more opportunity to drive more funds to conservation.
Yeah.
And it makes sense for those companies to do that, right?
Sure.
Like you were saying about 20 years down the road, right?
It makes more than sense. It makes sense to protect your long-term investment in your brand. It makes sense to market your brand. Consumers care about that, right?
Yep.
So, I think there's plenty of studies that show this, this corporate responsibility philosophy that it's a brand impact. You sell more stuff when you have that philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think there's more than a lot of reasons for businesses to be involved.
I mean, these are some neat things that are coming up the pipeline. It's an exciting thing. Like this information's out there. I've been consuming Randy Newberg Unfiltered for a while, so I'm a little tainted myself.
That's why you got so many people mad at you.
But one thing I want to get back on this public lands thing.
Yep.
If you guys, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. When I shared what I shared with my audience, they loved it. They agreed with it, but there were a lot of people that, especially given the strong conservative background that hunters have, this idea of the federal government owning public land being it's unconstitutional is what I hear a lot of, and I also have heard that the government is abusing the people, stealing public land or stealing land from ranchers and so forth. And because of that, we need to take the power back from the government and the states. We need to put it in the hands of the states. Well, we broke down that whole scenario. Like I said before, it's clear that the states sell it at rapid rates in general across the board. So giving it over to the state means sayonara to public lands. So, but a lot of people chimed in and said, yeah, but if we don't do that, the federal government will become like communist China, So I wanted to ask you, Randy, about that. Like, is it unconstitutional for the federal government to own public land?
The easy answer is no. And if you believe Cliven Bundy and his Constitution of Convenience, you would arrive at that conclusion. But last I checked, Cliven and his Bundy boys were not Supreme Court justices. In fact, I don't even think they're schooled in law.
Yeah.
And here's the hypocrisy of that argument in a couple ways. All right? Look at the United States Constitution. And there's the first three articles that we really concern ourselves with are the separation of powers, the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative.
Okay.
They say they're constitutionalists until the judiciary makes a decision they don't agree with. And then all of a sudden the judiciary is
doesn't count.
Yeah, let's ignore that.
Yep.
You can't just pick and choose pieces of the Constitution. And the judiciary, the court, every time this ends up in court, under these arguments of the equal footing doctrine and all this stuff, they get their teeth handed to them. So
what you're saying is that whenever someone tries to say it's not legal for the federal government to have in their management public lands, that whenever they go against that and say it's not legal, they lose.
They lose every time.
When it goes to the Supreme Court.
Right. And so let's just...
Meaning that there's hundreds of years of case law that says it is legal for them. Over and over and over again, it's deemed legal.
Right. So let's look at probably the best funded private legal group in the West that is advocating for state or sale of the public lands. It's the Mountain States Legal Foundation in Denver. Okay. It's where Secretary of Interior Gil Norton came through there. Secretary of Interior James Watt came through there. This is not a bunch of, like schoolyard punks. These are bright minds at the Mountain States Legal Foundation.
Okay.
So if this was so unconstitutional, why has the Mountain States Legal Foundation given up on litigating the issue? Why are they now advocating, let's just have Congress sell the lands? So the smartest minds that side of the argument have given up on litigation as an approach.
We lose every time.
Right,
we're never going to win.
They know it's constitutional. They're smart guys. They can read the Constitution. They can read court decisions. You get Cliven Bundy and his bunch of welfare tits, they can't read that stuff without being tainted, okay? Just call it for what it is.
Yep.
It's a tainted view, a selective view, a constitution of convenience is what it is. The smart minds on that side have said, you know what, we're going to get our teeth handed to us if we litigate this again.
But we still want all the lands.
Right. So what they've done now, they've switched, and if you go to their website and in the National Review, which is a far right leaning group publication, the president of the Mountain States Legal Foundation, who I believe is a well-schooled attorney, came out and said, you know what, it's time to just sell these lands. Let's convince Congress to sell the lands.
Yep.
It didn't mention anything about litigation because he knows
they'll lose.
He knows it's constitutional for the federal government to own lands. And all these guys who want to say that, ask any of them for the cases that prove that. They're going to break out, they're going to pluck and pull little pieces of their pocketbook constitution, which I have one, and they're going to have 2 or 3 pieces highlighted and ignore the rest of it.
Yeah.
So when people start saying that stuff to me, I've lost my patience for the shallow depth of information that some people are willing to apply when forming their opinions.
Yeah, it's no longer a real argument.
Right.
So you have Utah, though, and those in Utah that are now suing.
Right. They're going to pay a bunch of attorneys in Louisiana $14 million to sue the federal government
For the same thing.
For control of the lands. And now they're getting a little bit of cold feet because every legal expert in the world is telling them, hey, you knuckleheads, it's constitutional. You're going to lose. So now the governor of Utah, I think, has on his desk right now where they're only going to appropriate $4.5 million to start with. And who are they seeking advice from about the constitutionality? The same attorneys who are there to get the $14 million in fees.
Yeah. So there's enough evidence to show that it is legal for the federal government to have public lands.
Yep.
It's a done deal.
Yep.
So instead, they're going to try to get their hands on public lands. They're just going to try to get it passed that they get basically handed over to the states.
Right, exactly. The goal now...
They don't use the word sell, though. Right. They say transfer.
Transfer, right. So the goal now is to go to Congress and have Congress transfer the land to the states. Because if Congress does it, Congress can do what it wants under the Constitution. You would have no recourse then. So the states end up with the lands. Yep. And if we look at the wonderful state of Nevada that got 2.1 million acres on statehood upon becoming a state in 1865.
Yep.
How many acres do you think Nevada still has left?
3,000?
Yeah.
Out of
2.1 million. And they sold it to their cronies, their political buddies, for $1.50 an acre. And now they're fresh out of inventory.
How do you feel about that, Mark?
Yeah, somebody's a Muppet right there. Somebody's a Muppet.
So Nevada is out of inventory to sell now, so they're coming to the United States citizens and say, hey, can you replenish our inventory of land? We need to sell more of it because we don't want to change our way of spending money. So how does Alaska fund its university system and its mental health system? Selling land. Go to the Alaska State Land website right now, and there's oodles of land for sale. How does Utah fund a lot of things? There's an auction, I think it's May 26th. Last October, they sold 3,000 acres of prime land. In Utah now, you go on the Utah State Land website, they're bracing for another big auction on May 26th.
Yeah.
So this whole argument that people fall into, I understand the frustration. I come from a logging family. I lived... And my brother is still a logger. He lives this frustration of public land management. But just transferring it to a different entity doesn't solve it.
Well, that was my next question is, what if you take the land and you actually give it to the state?
Okay.
Let's say we walk through that.
Let's walk through that one. I love it when we get to walk through this because this usually shuts all the...
Because in theory, we've talked about this before. We've said, yes, they're going to sell it. But the proponents of this are saying, it's going to all of a sudden have all this management potential.
Right. That's what they say. So if you're a hunter, Colorado hosts more non-resident hunting than any state in the West. Right? They have over-the-counter elk tags. Fantastic hunting. They got 23 million acres of BLM and U.S. Forest Service lands.
Yes.
In Colorado, if this land transferred to the state land board, as everyone's proposing, you cannot, by default, hunt state lands in Colorado. So that 23 million acres of BLM and Forest Service that we can hunt, fish, hike, camp, whatever,
right, is
off limits. So how are we going to replace 23 million acres of hunting ground in Colorado in one swoop of the pen? People say, well, that's just a weird example, Randy. Well, it's 23 million acres weird, but okay, let's go to Colorado's neighbor to the north, Wyoming.
Yep.
Anyone who likes to deer hunt would love to hunt in Region G and Region H of Wyoming. Or they'd want to go elk hunting way back west of Cody.
Yep.
Okay? You get a Region G tag up in the Wyoming range.
Yep.
In Wyoming state lands, you can't camp there. You can hunt it, but you can't camp it. So you got a 6-hour hike in. And right now, you go in, you set up your camp, you hunt there for 4 or 5 days or however long, and you come back out.
Yeah.
Well, if you couldn't camp there, you'd have to stay in LaBarge or Big Piney or Daniel Junction, drive to the state forest every day, hike in 6 hours.
To your spot.
Hunt for 2 minutes, and hike 6 hours out. So think that through. Okay.
Yeah.
Central Wyoming. where there's some really great elk hunting, some antelope hunting. I go there whenever I can.
Yep.
Everybody's camped on the BLM land. Not anymore. You're driving from Rawlins or Casper a couple hours every way. So let's go to New Mexico, to the south of Colorado. Same thing. Can't camp on state lands. Everyone wants a Gila tag, right?
Yeah.
Everyone wants a tag for the Gila, for elk.
Yeah.
All right. The closest town of much significance,
Yep.
Daddle, Magdalena, Socorro, Truth or Consequences. So you're going to drive on those terrible, rotten roads for 2 hours every morning, or more than 2 hours, because you can't camp out there anymore? So it effectively takes a lot of hunting that we take for granted right now, takes it off the table.
Okay. So what about the state's ability to hold on to it?
That's the state's track record. I mean, you guys are from Oregon, right?
Yeah, we've talked about this. The Elliott National Forest. We beat this like a dead horse. I mean,
Elliott. Oh, on one of your podcasts, you did.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's like we've talked about this as well. It's not unlike me inheriting a rich man's house, along with everything it costs to manage it.
Right.
Once you take it out of federal control and you give it to the state doesn't have the budget to do any better with it than the federal government does.
Nope.
And so, and instead of like Montana, instead of the federal lands here being managed by taxes across the U.S., instead they're just managed by the small population of people in the state.
Right.
There's just no money for that.
There's not.
A fire comes and boom, you're bankrupt.
Exactly.
And the Elliott National Forest, that's all it is they sell it because
it's losing money.
It's just sucking them dry financially.
Right. And so this is a question I often get is from people in the Midwest or back east
State Forest
who say that, well, I can hunt my lands back here in Minnesota where I grew up. I'm like, you know what? You can.
Yeah.
But all states are different. In the western states, when they became states under their statehood, their enabling act, they were granted these state lands to fund their school systems. So most of their constitutions, since their constitutions, they are statutorily required to make a profit on those lands.
Yeah.
And if they can't, they do what they're doing with the Elliott State Forest in Oregon. They got to sell it because they're losing money on it.
Right.
Well, these western states cannot manage these any better than the federal government, as much as they say they can.
Yeah.
And here's the irony. So in my home state of Montana, in the 2011 and the 2013 session, the legislative sessions, they had bills that imposed no net gain of public land on state agencies because the states were incapable of managing what they already have. Okay, so here comes 2015. A bunch of money comes from outside the state to promote the idea of transferring land to the states. Funds all these far fringe operators, their campaigns. And now all of a sudden, 2 years later, they want to take over the 30 million acres of federal land in the in Montana, whereas 2 and 4 years ago, they introduced bills that said the state's inept and shouldn't take over any more land.
Okay. So
I mean, the hypocrisy of this.
It's a bad idea putting it. So, but let me ask you this though, because in Oregon especially, there's quite a distrust of the federal government. There's a really strong, movement of people just fed up and wanting the state to have it. They feel safer with the state having it than the federal government. Lots of talk about lands being stolen and stuff like that. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I live in Montana, which we got a lot of distrust of the federal government too. And in my other life, I'm a CPA, so my job is to disinherit the federal treasury. That's what I do every day.
Right.
So, I mean, my trust of the federal government is not that high either. So I get it.
You get it.
But in our country, we've done a really good job of making the feds the brunt of all of our problems.
Yeah.
Well, who are the feds? Congress. Congress is the feds. Every ailment we talk about with public land management, Congress could change. But they refuse to. Congress could increase the fees they charge so that and this isn't often an argument, that, well, the states make way more money on the land. The reason the states make way more money is Congress pays back a lot of their political favors by keeping the resource rates low on federal lands. So Congress could change that. Congress could change some of the rules related to all this lawsuits we talk about. Congress could do everything that we complain about on federal lands. The feds, i.e. Congress, could change every bit of that, but they're chicken shit. They don't have the spine to do it. And I don't care if you're left or right, R or D. I don't care what party they're from. I'm an equal opportunity abuser. I'm from the party of hunting, fishing, and public access. And if they're against us, I'm going to kick them in the teeth. And if they're for us, I'm going to pat them on the back.
Well, that's what sort of, like I made a comment about Ted Cruz with his statement about how, Texas, that only 2% of Texas is owned by the federal government. And we in Texas think that's 2% too much.
Right.
And he'd like to make the rest of the U.S. the same. And I was like, and I said this on an earlier podcast, if he had said only 2% of Texas is public land, and we in Texas think that's too much, all of a sudden that paints a whole different picture.
Huge.
But when you say only 2% is owned by Texas, you're like, right on, Texas, right?
Yeah. Realizing
that what he's saying actually, though, is that only 2% is owned by the public.
Right.
That's a completely different image. And to nobody, as soon as that comes out and people start to think about it, they're like, I live in the West. I don't want it like Texas. Even Texans, I got like hundreds of emails from Texans saying, don't make it like Texas. Whatever you do, we are so glad it's not like Texas. Don't make. And they have all these stories about they pay $6,000 a year to hunt a whitetail on this ranch, and they're like,
right,
that's Texas.
Yeah, and so when Cruz says that stuff, I mean, if I put my conservative credentials against Ted Cruz, I think he'd be on the liberal side of where I would end up.
Yeah.
So this is not a liberal or conservative issue. It's a common sense versus taking a spoon feeding from his donors.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Cruz is doing. And that's fine. People will say, well, Randy, I can't believe you're picking on Ted Cruz like that. Well, I'm not the one who opened my mouth and came up with the stupid idea that Ted Cruz came up with. Yeah. Selling the public lands is not a solution to anything other than if you view it as a currency to repay your political favors.
Yeah,
and
once it's gone, it's gone.
Exactly.
And it's not a long-term solution. Just like Nevada sold it all, now they're like, where do we come up with money now?
Right.
Yeah, I think the challenge for us as sportsmen is it's for us that live in Montana or anywhere in the western United States where you have access to public land and you it's so much easier to understand the value of it, right? So it's right there. It's fresh. All of us sportsmen that hunt and fish on public land, it's a really easy argument. It makes a lot of sense. How do we convey that value to people who live east of the Mississippi, who don't understand and haven't experienced it? That's what we need to figure out because we need the population, the masses on our side.
Yeah, but I found, at least in my audience and the people that get back to me, that most people on that side, they're really in favor, especially when I cited something Randy said. He's sitting right here. So in an earlier podcast, you made a comment that the public land in Montana is owned by the dude in New York. It's owned by the guy on Rhode Island. It's owned by the guy in Florida. Like, it's owned by all American citizens. When you make it the property of Montana, now it only belongs to the people of the state of Montana.
Yep.
Now, as someone that's from New York or back east, it's pretty easy to get pissed off at that point when you realize, hey, that's mine too. The confusion exists because the wildlife is owned and managed by the state, and they sometimes, especially like Montana's brutal on, I'll just say it, on non-residents.
We wrote the book on how to lay the leather to non-residents.
That's right. And so they feel like, well, I can't hunt Montana because of the way the state treats them.
Right.
Not because of the way the federal government does, not because of their right to public lands. They're totally different issues. Yeah. But that confusion exists. But when they start to realize that, okay, these public lands are actually mine in New York, then they go, okay, wait a minute. They're in strong favor of it. The biggest pushback I have experienced within the general hunting community has been from Western hunters who really feel like in order to manage the government, the states need to have a lot more power. And so we need to take back the lands from the federal government so the states have power and independence from the federal government.
I don't think anybody's going to argue that there's tons of room for improvement. I certainly don't hold up the current state of federal lands as the textbook of how you do it.
Yeah.
But all of these things we're talking about take our eye off the bigger picture, and that is proper management of the lands. It's almost like people have given up on forcing Congress to try do their job, so let's try to figure out some other backwoods.
Exactly. Rather than attack the process where it's at.
Yep.
Get like we talked earlier, we have football players trying to play soccer.
Yep.
Get some soccer players in there and actually start using the system the way that it's meant to be used. The idea, though, is, give it to state and then it's fixed.
It's not,
magic wand, ding.
Right, your state shows it's not fixed.
Right.
So let's go back to Utah, okay? Utah spent, I don't know how many $1 million doing an economic study about the feasibility of them taking over this 30-some million acres of federal lands in Utah.
Yep.
So I'm trying to remember the page. It's like 280-something. And here's what it says. This is a break-even or profit scenario for Utah if or oil prices stay above $90 per barrel. So right now we're at what, in the 30s? It's a profitable situation if natural gas stays at above $5 per million CFS or cubic feet.
Yeah.
However natural gas is measured. Right now it's at what, 2?
Yeah.
So Utah would be losing their ass right now. And there is no way I want the Saudi prince to force Utah to have to sell what currently are some of my public lands.
Yeah.
That's really, if you want to make it as simple as possible, by putting yourself in that situation and the citizens of the U.S. saying, we're going to give this to Utah because you guys are such good land managers. Their constitution says if you aren't making money on those lands, you got to get rid of them.
Yeah.
And right now, every economist they've hired has said you would be going deep in the hole. You would be selling everything right now under current oil and gas prices because the Saudis decided they're going to continue to flood the oil market.
Right. There's no...
So I don't know any hunter that I've talked to who wants the Saudi prince to determine his hunting access.
Yeah.
Have you guys?
Yeah.
You guys know any people who want the Saudi prince telling us we got to sell this land or keep this land?
I think that'd be hard to find.
Yeah, that would. It's scary. It's kind of scary stuff. I mean, the way we seem to be sort of losing this little fight for a while now, but it seems like with things like BHA, that there's more awareness, more soccer players getting drafted. That this can get better. But you talked about it earlier, and this is another. We're kind of running up on time, but I really want to pick your brain some more about how these public lands came to be in existence in the first place, and the role that Theodore Roosevelt played and others, and really get into all the effort and work that hunters put into it for a period of time in our history, but then have seemed to have disappeared.
Yeah.
In terms of fighting the conservation fight. And you did a great podcast on it, a couple really that touched on this, but that's one of those things where I think really opened my eyes too. Was I'm from a generation where I wasn't really part of that group. You're talking about people's names and events down at Yellowstone and things that I never even knew about. That in the paper, like these monumental pushes toward conservation that I didn't know about. And then just over time, it seems that hunters sort of took a back seat to all that. Like you said, not in a bad way, like they turned to habitat and to, other areas, but stop fighting against the idealists that have a different vision for lands and for habitat.
I think, and maybe I'm wrong, you guys might have other thoughts, but I think we're always, anything in a society, that's the human dynamic that you almost don't worry or fret about something until there's a risk of losing it. So if it seems like it's in abundance and it seems like it's safe, we're not going to wake up each morning and say, what am I going to do to keep those guys from stealing my public lands? But now history's repeating itself 120 years later, just like when Roosevelt, when he was president, by the time he was done, the federal estate had grown to 200, I think it was a little over 200 million acres. And he fought, we agree that hunters are right of center. I'm right of center.
Yep.
And most of this claim to get rid of the lands is coming from the far, far right.
Yeah.
Roosevelt was in the same position. He was right of center. His fight wasn't against the left. For him to build and establish the huge public lands we have today, it was a fight against similar interests far right of where he was. And I hate making it a left or right, because to me, what got us to where we are today is not making this a partisan issue or a Democrat-Republican. It's always been an American issue.
Right.
And so to your point, though, I think it's just human nature that we don't start really worrying about something until we fear of losing it. And that's where I feel my job with my platforms, TV show, and whatever else I can do is to make people aware of what's at risk. And it starts with learn the history. Once you know the history of what it took to build what you have today and the fact that it was handed to you, that, as Roosevelt said, for those yet in the womb of time, those yet unborn, I'm one of those guys Roosevelt was talking about. I was unborn. I was in the womb of time when he was fighting these battles. And so I feel this deep responsibility, this legacy has been handed to my generation. And my news to any politician is if you think you're going to get these public lands out of my hands, you're going to be prying them from cold, dead hands is what you're going to be doing.
Well, it's a good thing that we have, someone as stubborn as you out there in the forefront. Because honestly, I talked to you about this earlier before we got on air, is that who would, after dabbling a little with Hunt TV and stuff, you got to be crazy.
Stupid.
Yeah. You got to be glutton for punishment to try to do outdoor TV.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff was on one of our episodes. He knows how just from a logistics standpoint, how complicated it gets to do it self-guided on public lands. But just from the financial standpoint, I'm an idiot.
And editing and producing, you have to be hard-headed. And so I'm grateful for that, sir.
I don't know if as a CPA you should be telling people financially you're an idiot.
But this whole thing, seeing this thing coming, right? There's a lot of hunters like me asleep at the wheel here. I don't see it coming, until you've brought it up and talked about it and you're like, hey, there's some writing on the wall. Here's a red flag. Pay attention, and it's a good thing that that's there. Also, you're going up against, you're going to have to take some punishment because there's a lot of people that are gunning for you. Like you said, the artillery gets heavy when you're over a good target. So I like this, what's happening. I don't have the answers, but after talking to Ty on an earlier podcast, I really think that rather than abandon the process we have, we need to work within it and try to make it better. I sympathize somewhat for this Bundy or similar type ranchers a little bit in the sense that they go down there and they take over this wildlife refuge and they're trying to make this statement that they feel like things are not fair.
Right.
Unfortunately, they're playing football instead of soccer.
Yeah, no,
that was not the way to do it. No. Go down to the courtroom, hire the right people, work on the things you want to work on, go through the system, fight the fight there. And we as hunters sort of tend to, let's grab our guns and let's go sit someplace and have a protest.
Yeah.
While you said there's people in a courtroom laughing at us.
Right.
And so I'm not saying that their cause was just or anything like that. I'm just saying that fighting the fight where it's, you got to play. If you're going to win a soccer game, you got to play soccer.
Yeah. Right.
You can't say, well, I won. I just got a touchdown. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Not in a soccer game.
Well, I think that's what's so important about what you guys are doing at the podcast and so many other podcasts, what Randy's doing to recruit soccer players, right? Because we have them.
Yeah,
but
we do.
But maybe they're not aware of the impact and what needs to happen.
They're
right?
asleep,
So
like
to
me.
talk about this, sure, yeah,
Right.
To get this out there to the right people, we need to get it in the right ears, because there's soccer players out there that are on our side, and the more exposure we can get, the better our probability is of finding those people.
Yeah.
To your point, I mean, I can understand the frustration people have when they've built their livelihoods around public lands, whether they're state lands or federal lands, whatever. I mean, I come from a logging family.
Yeah.
A lot of my family's income or livelihood was subject to the whims of stumpage rates on state land or county land or federal land. So I fully get that. But that doesn't mean that the world stops because of your frustration. It doesn't mean that when you make a decision to build a business on a public asset, that somehow now that public asset is beholden to what you want when you have 350 million other owners of that asset. And so I get the frustration level. I share it. I've decided my frustration level, I'm going to go about it this way. I'm going to become politically active. I'm going to be engaged. I'm going to build platforms. I'm going to spread a message. I'm going to become almost a missionary for the cause of what I think the change needs to be. And that's
it.
So I can relate to the frustrations they have, but I can't relate to the taking over a wildlife refuge and people dying over that. I mean, it was such a misguided effort in my mind.
Yeah, I feel real bad about it. I feel like there's so much passion there, and frustration, and but directed in all the wrong ways. And unfortunately, I don't think it
didn't help the cause.
Didn't help anything.
No, I don't think it helped anything. But the beauty of all of this is we live in the United States of America, where even a guy
even a Scottish Canadian Spanish man can live here too.
Right, and he's talking about his third hunting season.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about my 40th hunting season. Yep. And it doesn't matter if it's your first or your 40th. It doesn't matter if your grandparents came from Finland in 1910 like mine did.
Right.
Or you came from Canada?
Scotland. No, I come from Scotland.
Okay.
I've got a son.
Right.
I've got a 7-year-old son at home named Angus, who's counting the days, first generation American, counting the days to get out and go hunting with me.
There.
Right? So that's why I appreciate the work you guys do.
That is the beauty of America. Yep. That's what's always been so American, and that's why public lands are so American. It is an idea that America gave the world.
Oh, yeah.
Right. How many people do you talk to who wish that they live in South Africa or they live in some other place, in Scotland maybe, or the UK? They would give anything to have what we have for opportunity that is tied to public lands.
When I have friends who come from other countries and visit, they're like, I can't believe this is public.
I know.
Like, this is everybody's land. Right. What do you mean? It's an amazing thing. So for anyone to think, I think a lot of them, they're not disagreeing that, a lot of hunters, they're not saying, don't take away my public land. They're not saying that. They're saying, let the state manage it, and then it'll fix everything. And so So they're getting duped, really, Randy. They're getting tricked. They're getting tricked. Hey, we'll solve all your problems by giving to the state, not realizing that they're signing away their public lands, selling them, getting them taken away from them. Right. That's what really pisses me off about this Ted Cruz kind of stuff. It's like you're deceiving. I feel like you're deceiving people with that using their own party lines, and not disclosing the full effects and twisting it to get people to take an action that is actually the opposite of what you're saying they're going to get.
Right.
To me, that is at the bottom of that is just. It's so wrong.
We're about ready to go unfiltered here. I can see it, Brian. No, I get you, and that's where politicians are very good at taking people's frustrations, packaging them in some supposed solution, and selling it. Because we all know when we're frustrated, we get to the point where it's almost, anything's better than today.
Yeah.
And it takes our eye off the ball. I just get so frustrated when there's continually the lure given to the frustrated hunter of, oh, we'll make life better for you. We'll have the states do it. We'll have the states do it. Track record has proven time and again that to that degree, the states are not going to do any better job than the feds, and they're going to sell it.
Yeah.
Or they're going to somehow change it where hunting access is not what we have today. And so all we can do is
keep on
keeping on. And the beauty is as much as we can get ground down in this stuff and it kind of wears on you and it's draining, we still live in America.
Yeah.
We live in the best freaking country that ever was formed on this planet. We still have hundreds of millions of acres of public land. We still can hunt almost any place time we want within the law. Randy Newberg, am I allowed to be in the third person here?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
I've got
on our show, we're pretty lenient on that.
Okay. I've got, where else in the world can I have 50 long guns or 25 long guns or however many and 5,000 rounds of live ammunition and nobody even blinks an eye? I mean, we are living in a great place.
Yeah.
And I don't want people to think that, the world's coming to an end.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm
Lots
not going
to be proud of and happy about, excited about.
Yeah. I mean, we've pulled off a restoration of wildlife in this country that nobody thought was possible. Everybody thought, well, we're just accept that the elk is going to go the way of the dodo bird. Okay, we'll accept
the buffalo.
Yeah, we'll accept that the brown pelican is going to go the way of the passenger pigeon.
Yeah. No,
we pulled it off.
Yeah, we did.
And as long as I got a breath in my body, I'm going to keep pushing the ball forward. I'm not going to be distracted by these guys who want to try pull us off to the edge and sell us a bill of goods just for them and their buddies.
Cold dead hands, right?
Cold dead hands. That's what we say at my house. My wife is guilty of that too. When it's an important issue at my house, she'll look at me and say, cold dead hands, which means I dare you, buddy.
It's not worth the fight. It's right there.
But she's got a lot of guns, so I got to pay attention.
So Jeff, I want to get you on the podcast again and really get into a lot more about 2% for conservation. You just launched it.
Yeah.
Just yesterday, or
we turned the website on midnight last night. Actually.
So what's the address?
It's www.fishandwildlife.org.
Okay.
So easy to remember, and I would love the opportunity to get on the podcast, go a little deeper in what we're trying to do, and
because we talked about this,
get some awareness out.
Yeah, he was a little reluctant to come on right now. He's like, well, let's get you a little more schooled up. I'm like, dude, let's rip the Band-Aid off and let's go. So
I appreciate that.
I'm glad you came on.
And Randy's been a big part of helping me learn a lot about conservation and get 2% going. So
Jeff is the typical humble hunter. I mean, America is full of humble hunters. Yeah. He's understated. He's doing this amazing project. You saw when you asked him questions, it's almost like he felt like he was boasting or some way. And so he just sits here and he tries to be polite. I'm working on him, Jeff. Come on, you got to start. Got to start being a loudmouth like Randy is. So.
Well, we will definitely connect some more and get into more details on that because it's just a cool thing. I want to use this platform to make a difference. So that's.
And you are.
That's one of those things.
You guys are making a big difference.
Yeah, totally.
And when you move to Bozeman, Montana,
sorry, honey, we're moving.
Yeah, he's. Are you moving, or were you just jerking?
We are moving. I don't know where though.
All right, Jeff,
I probably shouldn't say that, but now the world knows.
Jeff and I are putting in our pitch for Bozeman because we want to have you nearby so we can take advantage of your wonderful platform here to crank up the volume on our issues.
It would be neat. This is a special place. I'm really. I do smell a lot of marijuana, though.
It's Missoula. I mean, this place.
Yeah, I don't know if we properly set the stage of where this podcast was
kind of like Portland.
Taking place.
It's a brew fest, by the way.
Right. I mean, in Missoula, you can get a contact high by walking down the street.
That's what I was wondering if. I haven't really. Well,
You would swear pot was legalized in this town, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah, I thought it was, yeah.
I did too.
Yeah.
It's not, huh?
No, and in Montana, we have this Bozeman, Missoula thing going on, most partly because of the two universities. I didn't go to either one, so I don't really care.
There's kind of a hippie thing hippie vibe here in Missoula.
Yeah, most definitely.
strong.
And Missoulians will
Hipster.
tell you that Bozeman has a yuppie thing, a Bose Angeles kind of thing going on.
Bose
so.
Angeles, right?
Yeah.
Bose Angeles.
That's what they say. But you know what? When I go home, my wife, she almost makes me get deloused when I come home from Missoula. Yeah, I mean, this place has more chiggers and ticks and critters running around. If you were a barber or a hygienist type, if you were in personal hygiene,
You'd just be unemployed here.
you would be in the unemployment line in Missoula, Montana. If personal hygiene was part of your livelihood.
Oh, bloody hell.
Really? I mean, I don't want to put Jeff on the spot, but
He's just sitting there.
Jeff, I don't disagree with you, Randy, but I think all the advocates you just made in Missoula from this podcast about your passion for hunting, you're losing them all.
These Missoula guys, they love it. They give it back to me. They give me the rhubarb so hard about Bozeman, and we deserve it. But it's just always fun poking. Since there's no Missoula guys here to defend it, I've got like an open field here to lay it to them.
I wouldn't know any better.
Well, I'll point them out too. You see that dude over there that looks like Jesus? You're going to have to edit this part out. I'm sorry. It's going downhill fast.
Well, guys, I really appreciate you coming on and keep fighting the fight and anytime.
Thank you
Come
guys.
back.
I want to have you guys on our podcast.
That'd be great.
It'd be fun.
Yeah, no, really, thank you. You know, and my boy Angus too. Thanks you. 'Cause, no, it's what you're doing. You're laying down the foundation for my kids and your kids and their kids.
Well,
appreciate it. Cheers.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me. And anyone who doubts it, cold dead hand.
That's right, eh?
All right.
Thank you very much,
Stay
guys.
gritty,
Cheers.
Randy.
Stay
Thanks,
great.
guys.
Yep.
Thanks, Jeff.
Looking forward to catching up more.
Thank you so much. Cheers, man.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Okay, gritty friends, I hope you enjoyed that podcast. If you did, please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes, Podbean, or Stitcher. We love reading your reviews. And connect with us on social media if you're on there. Look us up on Facebook and Instagram, and take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can receive notifications when we upload new videos. We've got a sweet deal with Mountain Ops. You get 20% off on all Mountain Ops supplements, combo packs, and apparel when you type in the word gritty at checkout. If you're a hardcore elk hunter, or you want to be, go to the Elk 101 website online and check them out. Our friend Corey Jacobson is killing it with some of the best elk hunting information and entertainment on the web. If you haven't heard, we're doing a huge gear giveaway to try and grow and expand the gritty community on Facebook and Instagram. I asked a bunch of friends to pitch in on this gear giveaway, and they all came through with some awesome stuff. Our friends at Kafaru, Rockslide, First Light, Phelps Game Calls, One Shot Gear, Mountain Ops, Triple X Archery, Blacktail Outdoors, and Is It September Yet are pitching in some sweet gear for the giveaway. We'll announce all the details in the next few weeks. All you have to do to be entered to win is like our Gritty Bowman Facebook page and follow us on Instagram. All right, friends, let me leave you with one other quote from Theodore Roosevelt, who said, "It behooves every man to remember that the work of the critic is of altogether secondary importance, and that, in the end, progress is accomplished by the man who does things." We all have a choice. We can be people who do things or people who criticize the work of others. It's pretty simple, really. Get out there and do your thing. Good luck on your hunts, and stay gritty.
This is Ty Stubblefield, and you're listening to the Gritty Bowman.
Gritty Bowman.